So in the news lately, there has been a lot of talk about conferring statehood upon Puerto Rico and/or the District of Columbia.
Path to D.C. statehood actually goes through the Caribbean.
It seems ridiculous that D.C. is not a state and Puerto Rico.
Drama unfolded on the House floor on Thursday over the push for D.C. statehood.
Or whether we are against taxation without representation.
Finally, I hope that this issue will be addressed and that we'll have full democracy in Puerto Rico, as we all should in America.
And while there are a lot of difficult, complicated questions involved, in this video I'll be talking primarily about the most difficult of all. What would we call them? Now, for Puerto Rico, the name is obvious. Well, sort of. I mean, it might seem obvious now, but let's talk about it anyway. And let me start by apologizing for my pronunciation. I swear someday I'm going to do a whole video on pronunciation, but for now, I'm sorry, generally. The island of, here we go, Boriken, as it was known by the Taino people, who already lived there, was stumbled upon by Christopher Columbus on his second voyage to the islands of the Caribbean. He labeled the island San Juan Bautista, or St. John the Baptist, initially, but eventually that label came to name the main harbor and capital city, and has since been shortened to San Juan. The name Puerto Rico, or Rich Port, was then adopted for the whole island. The fun part came in 1898, when the U.S. acquired the island as part of the treaty that ended the Spanish-American War, yet another Treaty of Paris. In that treaty, the island was labeled Puerto Rico, at least one journalist defending that spelling because he believed it was easier for us Americans to pronounce. Now, I'm someone who is anatomically incapable of rolling my R's, but even I can say Puerto Rico. Also, I wonder if that guy's ever heard of Florida or Los Angeles.
We love Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico.
Then again, maybe he was on to something. Anyway, while some argued that the American Porto was just wrong, go figure, many of them considered it a trifling matter. So it may not surprise you to learn that the paternalistic powers that be,
I'm the paterfamilias,
won out, and the name of the new territory was officially styled Puerto Rico for about 30 years. In 1931, a petition was introduced in Congress to officially change the name to the correct Spanish spelling, Puerto Rico. And while there were some who were against it, the measure was passed without debate. After the measure passed, a spokesperson, Camilo Ocias, commented, "Never underrate the importance of individual and national sentiment in human affairs. The change of the spelling of the name Puerto Rico may seem trivial to some, but to the inhabitants of that island it is fundamental, priceless, all-important." So, if Puerto Rico is to become a state, I'm just assuming we'll call it Puerto Rico. But I could be wrong. Never underestimate the ability of Congress to apply names that are problematic for no good reason. To it, I give you Washington, D.C. Now, in years past, when Washington, D.C. was considered as a state, a new name was sought. At one time, it would have been called New Columbia, but then Columbia became a bit problematic when...
Nobody's going to click a video called A Nuanced Discussion of Some of the Recent Depictions of Columbus in Popular Culture.
No, you should. You should absolutely watch that video. It's really very good. But then Congress made a decision.
Today, by passing H.R. 51, to omit the state of Washington Douglas Commonwealth.
That's right. In the recently passed bill in the House of Representatives in 2021, they decided to name the new state, should it be created, Washington, D.C., where D.C. stands for Douglas Commonwealth. Now, I'll give them props for voting in favor of statehood, more on that later, but I have several problems with this name. First, it's kind of two names. We'll ignore the word Commonwealth for now because it's basically meaningless, but Washington, Douglas. I like naming the new state after Frederick Douglass, one of this country's most famous abolitionists and himself a former slave, but you're pairing it with a slaveholder. Okay, stop typing. I have plenty of patriotic respect for our founding fathers, and I know that Washington came to be uncomfortable with slavery and that he freed his slaves in his will, but the fact is, he and a bunch of our founding fathers owned other people, enslaved other people, black people. And I'm not arguing for historical purity here, okay? Our founders were imperfect, and so are we, and so was Frederick Douglass. But can't we just take a stand here? Can't we just call it Douglas? Oh, I guess someone thought of that. Well, I agree.
We'll do that.
There's some history here. When Washington, that one, was debating what to call their state, they specifically didn't call it Columbia because there was already a District of Columbia, and they believed it would be too confusing. Now you're going to take the city of Washington, turn it into a state, and give it the name of a state that already exists. That's just cold. If I lived in Washington State, I'd be kind of annoyed. And finally, it's just too cute. If you want to keep Washington, D.C., keep it. And don't try to find words that match the letters. Just call it Douglas. The state of Douglas. You can still have the city of Washington, but it will just be in the state of Douglas. And while that might be a little confusing, it wouldn't be the first time we've done it. Kansas City, Missouri, California, Kentucky, Virginia, Minnesota, Texas, Wisconsin. Anyway, that's what I think our new states should be called. Now, just in the interest of being thorough, let's talk about whether Puerto Rico and D.C. should become states. And the correct answer is yes. Okay, I'll elaborate. The correct answer is hell yes, if they want to. And if not being a state means you get no say in how your taxes are spent, then of course they should become states. And if Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz think it's a power grab by Democrats, well, they can just kiss my ass.
Kiss my ass. Kiss my ass.